Leadership. Probably many of you think that there are a lot of people out there who think they have a clue about leadership. The question is, who really knows not only the theory, but also the real world practice? You know that we have academics out there who have great concepts, but often they lack the real world application. And then you have people who made a career in one way or the other, but they somehow lack the scientific backing. So they have opinions, but there's no scientific backing for what they say. You can never be sure if it works for you. And our guest today will give you both. William Pietersen raised in South Africa and received a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford University, and he practiced law afterwards. And then he embarked on an international business career, and I can tell you that is a career as it should be. Over a period of 20 years, he served as a CEO, and not any CEO. When you listen to brands like Lever Foods, Seagram USA, Tropicana, Sterling, Winthrop Consumer Health, and that is not all, because you might now think, where's the academic part? Yeah, in 1998, Willie was named Professor of the Practice of Management at the Columbia University Graduate School of Business. When you now think Columbia is quite well known, yes, it is. He specialized in strategy and the leadership of change. His method and idea there, of course, are very present in executive education. And that's not all. He served as a teacher and advisor to many global companies. And when you hear that list, it is even more impressive. Aviva, Bausch & Lomb, Boeing, Chubb Corp, Deloitte, Depew, Electrolux, Ericsson, ExxonMobil, Henry Schein, Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta, Novartis, Saltwater Project, SAP, UGI, the United Nations Federal Credit Union, and also the Girl Scouts of the USA. And when you now think, what can he now offer for us? Not only his wisdom, he also wrote a new book, Leadership, the Inside Story, Time-Tested Prescriptions for Those Who Seek to Lead. Hello and welcome, Professor Willie Pietersen.
Thank you very much, Niels. Happy to be with you.
Thank you very much for taking the time, and we're getting straight into it. When I read your book, very impressive, by the way, I strongly recommend anyone to read that book when you're into leadership. You start with building the foundation, the 3 domains of leadership. Many people are out there and say, I have an idea of leadership. My rules are the following. What is your take on the foundations of leadership?
Yeah, in order for us to excel at leadership, which is really what we're striving to do. And I would just add, I think that the real leadership, effective leadership, is a scarce commodity. We need to think about a framework that will enable us to constantly improve our leadership capability, monitor our progress, understand how well we're doing. So the framework that I offer here for thinking about leadership in this kind of productive way depicts leadership as consisting of 3 interdependent domains. They operate like an ecosystem, each one supporting the other. If one of them is underperforming, it interferes with the performance of the others. And briefly, they consist of these 3 domains. Firstly, leadership of self. This demonstrates authenticity, deep self-knowledge, grounded in a clear set of values that dictate our actions, guide our actions, and inspire others. That's the threshold requirement. And so personal leadership. And then there is strategic leadership, establishing a clear direction for the organization to succeed in a competitive environment with a clear set of priorities for success. That's the second domain. And the third domain is interpersonal leadership, bringing out the best in others. I think we can quickly understand that we can't really excel at any one of those domains on its own and in isolation of the others that mutually support each other in that kind of way. Now, I have found that to be a very productive starting point for us to think productively about what leadership is and how to excel at it. So we dig into each of these aspects one by one, delve into them, and make that sort of a programmatic approach to understanding and excelling at leadership.
Excellent. So do you think that when someone says, look, I am pretty good in 2 out of 3, we all know we have our weaknesses. Do you think there can be any good leader out there who probably is good in 1 or 2 domains out of the 3, or do you have to master all 3 of them?
You know, it's an interesting thing. There's no such thing as perfection, is there? I mean, we're all walking balance sheets of strengths and weaknesses. The key is awareness, to understand where we might be falling short, and then to kind of strive to improve on that. So, no, I take Virginia Rometty's mantra. She was the head of IBM. And she said, celebrate progress, not perfection. I think we just need to understand that as we strive to lead effectively in a tumultuous, changing world, we have to put the accent on one or other of those dimensions at any given time, because it's all situational, depending on what we're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely.
And when we do so, it's a very good reference point for us to see where we might be falling short. You know, I'm a very great fan of an African proverb that says, don't look where you fell, look where you slipped. And when we go back to this reference point, we can often understand, oh, that's not working because I'm not fully efficient or effective that particular domain. Now, there's one other angle to these three domains. It tells us that we're really running two important systems. One is a business system, that's strategic leadership. And the other two comprise the social system, and that's the people. And at the end of the day, leadership is an alchemy of competence and character. So we begin with character. This is what Marcus Aurelius, the Roman philosopher, called our command center. And character begins with this deep self-knowledge and being grounded in a clear set of values that ground our beliefs and guide our actions. And this is the source of our inspiration, the ability to inspire others. And I think when that's deficient, it's the most crippling deficiency of all. The character deficiency is the most serious of the deficiencies. We can outsource competence. We can get others to do things for us because they have better knowledge than we do on particular aspects of driving a business forward in information technology, in marketing and sales. We cannot outsource character. It's something we have to build for ourselves. You know, there's a great Finnish proverb that says we're all blacksmiths of our own happiness. I think the same is true of leadership. We're all blacksmiths of our own leadership effectiveness. We have to build it ourselves. And then that's the essential springboard.
Yeah, excellent point. Also, what I found really, really very intriguing in your book, you have a chapter, which is, in my opinion, quite provocative, learning to learn. And let's face it, when you talk about leaders, most people who have leadership abilities according to their own either skill set or according to their own, let's say, documentation of their own skills. Many people who are on a certain level of career say, look, I made it here, so I'm able to learn. Otherwise, I wouldn't make my career up to this point. What do you mean with learning to learn? Because most people who claim to be leaders will claim that they are good learners.
Yeah, well, you know, this is a crucial point. First issue, I think, for us is to understand why it's so important to be a learner. And here I come to the kind of Darwinian imperative of the need to adapt constantly to a complex and changing environment and build organizations that are learning systems and able to do that on a continuous basis. Many companies have failed because of their inability to do that.
Absolutely.
The starting point here is for leaders themselves to be effective leaders, learners. And if they're not effective learners, they can't lead their organizations to be effective learning systems in that kind of way. So instilling, you know, practices and beliefs about learning become key. Now, the interesting thing is we all learn all the time, but we're not aware of how we learn. And I think once we're aware of how we learn, we've got the points of leverage that we can apply to say, I'm going to learn better because I understand what comprises learning. And here I come to Margaret Wheatley's, I think, very compelling dictum here. You cannot change a living thing from the outside. You can only disturb it so that it changes itself. I think what learning does is it invites various disturbances very deliberately and intentionally. And so we're constantly learning from stimuli that we invite into our minds. Something we often don't realize is the power of pausing and allowing some periods of calm to allow ideas to come into our minds. Now, I have found, for example, a very, very effective learning technique is to take a walk.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize at the time when I was doing this as a complete habit, a dedicated habit. Every morning when I was a CEO, I walked through Central Park at the beginning of the day for 2 miles. Now, my first instinct was, well, this is for exercise and fitness. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Then I began to realize something else was happening. And that is, unbidden, uninvited, ideas would come into my head that I'd been grappling with, trying to analyze in a systematic way. And a creative idea would enter my mind just through some kind of stimulus, watching a bird fly across the sky, looking at the trees or whatever it is. And I began to realize that this was part of a learning system. And then I went into the evidence because I like evidence-based prescriptions, not just subjective ideas. Look what happened to me. I'm sure it'll happen to you. I said, well, no, we need to apply a little bit of rigor. Is there evidence to support this? And then I found all of these compelling examples of massive breakthroughs in thinking, breakthroughs in technology that occurred to people during a walk. Nicholas Tesla, for example, at the founding of electricity, alternating current was the way forward, but it required all kinds of substations along the way. It couldn't travel a long way, and it needed to because it was too capital intensive. He struggled with it for a few years, and then he abandoned it as unsolvable. He went for a walk in a park in Budapest. And then the idea came to him of how to establish alternating current in a more efficient way. That's what our electrical system is based on now. And it came from Nicholas Tesla grappling with it over time, not being able to solve it, pausing, withdrawing from that, allowing some freedom in his mind.
Excellent point.
And this happens over and over and over in the examples that I looked at. They're very compelling examples. So it was not just my own experience, but I found that this is evidence-based. It's a great idea to do this. It's kind of under the heading that I think, if you want to learn something in a very busy world, take time to pause, to think, and then to go. That speeds you up. It doesn't slow you down.
It's quite a challenge to convince people of that, isn't it? Because, today people say, can't we make this seminar, this workshop, this coaching a bit shorter online from 2 days to 1 day to half a day to 90 minutes? And probably you can do the 90 minutes in between two meetings. And you suggest people to do the exact opposite of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the learning component requires some kind of a pause. And, the trick I understand psychologically as I went into this, and I do explain in the chapter that there is a kind of a chemical basis of what happens to our minds when we walk, and it releases various chemicals that induce calmness and the ability to think. But the underlying science of it is clear that if you want to solve a problem, if you keep hammering at it, you're unlikely to solve it if it's complex and multidimensional. The trick is to withdraw from it periodically and do something totally different. You might go to the theater, pick up a book or read an article. Just put that aside. And that's a way that creativity gets introduced into your thinking, or a way in which it gets introduced into your thinking.
Excellent. When we now talk about exactly that people try to solve a complex problem. Often people say, I have a certain problem. I need to find the solution, the best solution. They try to find the hidden truth behind that. And you talk about barriers to truth. And I think there are two aspects to it. First, you talk about asking the right questions. And I'd like to know, how do I know that I'm asking the right questions? But also I like to know, because you're talking about how to discover and overcome hidden biases. And I know from my consultancy experience, and probably you know it as well, there are many people out there who deny that they have them. These are people who say, oh, in recruiting, I just give the job to the best candidate. I know who the best candidate is. I have a feeling for the market, and the feeling just guides the way. They say, during my career, I'm so skilled, I don't have these biases anymore. So double question here. So first, how do I ask the right questions? And then how to deal with people who think they don't have any biases, they know how to deal with situations. Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, certainly. Well, let's just take each of those in turn quickly.
Yes.
Everything we know in the world, whether it's scientific or general knowledge, comes from a question somebody asked. If you want a great answer, you must frame your question very well. Framing the wrong question leads you to the wrong answer. I think what skilled leaders do is learn over time how to ask the right questions. Now, the right questions are not easy. This is a developed competence. We've all been to meetings where we've seen somebody present something to a senior executive team. And then one of the people asks a gotcha question, revealing their ignorance of the presenter.
Yeah.
That immediately stops learning. And now there's a culture in the organization to always be on the defensive and defend what you're putting forward. So asking a question that is more open-ended and inclusive and sincere, and inclusive in the sense of framing it as a we question, not a you question. It's not an accusation. It's not confrontational. I used to practice law. Questions in a courtroom are adversarial. They're designed to expose ignorance or contradictions or downright lies, right? Great questions that promote learning are the opposite of adversarial questions. They are invitations to think more clearly. I think asking them as we, what more should we know about this? What would happen if we don't do this? This is a question that always should be asked in any major decision. There's always two alternatives, doing it and not doing it. And there might be more than one proactive one as well, but at minimum, there are two. And we seldom say, what will happen if we don't do this? And then we play that out, for example, and invite people to think about it. Now, I'll give you one quick example of a powerful question that changed the outcome of a war, literally. Now, this is the American War of Independence in the 18th century against the British. And the American forces, then 13 colonies, pulled together in a kind of ragtag army, very under-resourced and overmatched by the British Army, at the time the strongest army in the world. In the early stages, they were losing very badly. George Washington, the commander of these forces, sat down with these senior officers and said, well, we're losing unless we change the game here. It's the game over. So he asked this question: how can we defeat the British? And over a period of time during the discussion, lots of suggestions came forward. None of them were practical. None of them would work. It became very dispiriting. Until eventually one of the officers said, based on this deep thinking, eventually said, I think we're asking the wrong question. How can we win? Doesn't yield a good answer. The real question is, how can we avoid losing? And out of that question came a whole new strategy of commando raids on the British, surprise raids, quick withdrawals before taking losses, on the theory that they would exhaust the British, who would then go home. And it worked with the help of the French at the end. The final push. And it's literally true, if we take that story, that it was one single intelligent question, after a lot of wrestling, that changed the outcome of a war. Now, there are many examples of this kind. I think this is if you want to be a learning system, you have to really, really understand how to ask great questions. And I practice all this all the time when we do strategy and as a consultant. It's all based on kind of collective inquiry, asking the right questions, and coming up with insights. Great questions produce great insights.
Great questions also probably mean that people need to have a sincere interest in the solution. Because let's just give you one example. Today, of course, hopefully not too many people, but you have some people who go into an organization, they say, look, my career will be 10 companies of 3 years each. I go in, I change something, I will celebrate the short-term winnings, I will probably get a financial outcome from that, and then I move on to the next enterprise, and the long-term damages to what I've done probably will be none of my business because I'm out of that game now. Don't you think this is a problem to asking the right questions when people don't hold a sincere interest in a long-term solution?
I totally agree with you. I think, questions that are purely self-serving always end up, I think, will mostly end up in grief, because the essence of leadership is not power or self-interest. The essence of leadership is service to others. So, and if you think really about ultimate human motivation, it's the opportunity to divert ourselves to a cause larger than ourselves, together with the opportunity to make a difference to the outcome. So leaders, I think, who go into this game, to exercise power and make a lot of money, in many ways are kind of manipulating, milking, whatever it is, the organization. And you're absolutely right. These things play out over time. They're not instantaneous. And just jumping around from one to the other in a self-serving manner is not what I would classify as effective leadership.
Fully agree. Getting back to the biases, how do you think we can deal with people? Because, of course, now we have a more, let's say, omnipresent view on there are unconscious biases. Unconscious bias training is pretty much a new standard, especially in the US. It's usually standard training you have to undergo before you become a leader. However, there are still people out there who say, after 20 years in business, I know what to do. I have a feeling who is the right candidate. I have the feeling what is the right thing to do in the market. They think they have some sort of not really possible to grab higher feeling of what to do next. How to deal with people who pretty much claim that they don't have these biases anymore, that they overcame the biases.
Yeah, how easily we can deceive ourselves. If you take surgery now, being a surgeon, you learn over time various techniques of doing it well, and eventually they become almost unthinking. At your fingertips, you know what to do instantaneously. And people want to call that, oh, my gut told me what to do. Your gut doesn't think. It warns you, if you like, if you're on the wrong track, pause and think. But actually, instinct is an intellectual shortcut. That's what it is. It's based on experience and prior thought. But even there, every now and again, to withdraw and think about what you're doing in a conscious kind of way is critically important. Now, there's a certain amount of arrogance that creeps in leadership. I've been successful. I am successful. Therefore, I know what to do. Well, the world is changing. What you did last year and last week won't necessarily work this week. You need to constantly understand the new challenges and adjust. And if you can't do that, of course, you're always, as the generals say in warfare, you're always fighting yesterday's war. So I think it's very important. Awareness is the key. Now, I think what you're putting your finger on here, Niels, is this feeling that most of us have, that everybody else is biased except us. The
bias blind spot. The bias blind spot. Yeah.
Yeah. This is prevalent. Everybody thinks I'm not biased, but every argument they hear that they don't agree with, oh, that's biased. Political parties are like that. They're completely embedded in their own set of beliefs, their convictions, which become a substitute for thinking. Obviously, I don't know about you, Niels, but I've never heard two politicians discussing their differences and one saying to the other, oh, I get it now, and then jumping over the fence and joining the other party.
Fully agree. That will never happen. That will never happen.
So this is a kind of warning sign for us in business. If you do that kind of thing, totally embedded thinking, I'm right and this is the only way, you're gonna hit a problem sooner or later. Now, I'll just give you a big. There are four biases that I find are prevalent across all the time. The key is awareness, and to be able to monitor our own thinking and talk to our teams about it and be able to, call each other out. The first is the confirmation bias, and that's very prevalent, something we all share. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Second is status quo bias, which is, again, a strong magnet, right? And then you get denial, and you get siloed thinking. I find those are the four most prevalent. Whenever I introduce these biases to people, unleash some thinking, people say, absolutely. And then I say, give me examples. some of the examples.
Silo thinking. I could give you an example from yesterday. You talk to someone in the supply chain and they say, oh yeah, that's really important. We really need these goods. However, that's not my responsibility. You need to find someone else because I'm just purchasing that kind of good here.
Yeah, that's the silo. And the silo, the trouble with silos is competition becomes internal, but the battle is external.
Yeah.
And it's a failure to really understand that what we have to do is a collective effort to create some kind of impact externally. It's, the worst, talk about back to questions. The worst question in the world is of confronting a problem is to say, what should we do? The world doesn't care what we do. They care only about what they get. The question then becomes, what does the external market need, particularly our customers, etc., and what decisions can we make internally that best create that impact externally? And then it becomes a game, or it's a team sport after that, because that's the common purpose.
Yeah.
The most dramatic example of biases, and there are a number of them, but I pick out one just to get our thinking into focus. Denial. And I think here of the story of Kodak. Now, Kodak was a monumental success, an icon.
Yeah.
And in 2005 or 90, I think it was somewhere around there, it was the fifth most valuable brand in the world.
Yeah.
Now, what happened to Kodak is it was overtaken by digital photography because Kodak relied on camera and film.
And I think, wasn't it a Kodak engineer who suggested that he had an idea for digital photography and they turned it down because they said, no, we are selling these little film tins or however you call them.
That's correct. That's correct.
And they had the idea. They could have taken over the world, but they said, no, we don't do this.
They did. This engineer was a man called Mike Sasson, a very dedicated guy, very creative, and he invented digital photography, literally. You could say Kodak failed and went into insolvency because it was overtaken by a technology that it invented. This makes it a kind of an appalling story. Now, Mike Sasson gave an interview to the New York Times. And so he reports, and I can quote actually what he said. He took this invention of digital photography to an executive team in Kodak. First reaction from them was that the resolution was not perfect. It wasn't as good as film. And he said, well, don't worry about that. We can perfect that. It'll be just as good as film. Just give me time to do the R&D, right? And then somebody said, well, if we actually introduce this, it will totally cannibalize our existing highly profitable film and camera market. They had 85% of the camera market, 90% of the film market, and they were a cash generator like you've never seen.
Yeah.
You know what they told Mr. Sasson? He reported that in his interview to the New York Times. They said, it's a cute idea, but don't tell anybody about it. He didn't tell anybody about it, and Kodak went insolvent. They actually, I would say, committed suicide through denial.
Yes.
They didn't like the disease, so they denied the cure. That's the problem. Now, there are other examples, of course, of, I don't know why my phone keeps ringing. I'm sorry about this.
That's perfectly fine. But there's one clear message here. You will never stop progress by just denying that progress exists. Someone will have the idea and will take it. But an excellent point here, because you have a chapter on getting information to flow. And let's face one thing. Often you have companies, suddenly a problem appears and it's a massive one. And when you track it down, probably years before the problem became imminent, someone at the bottom of the hierarchy said, look, we have this problem. And people said, yeah, but this is not the time to bring this problem to the table. So you have a chapter on how to make the information to flow from the bottom up. Let's face it, I work in consultancy for more than 20 years. Many people I meet say, look, I've tried this. I didn't make good experiences with it, to say the least, so I'm not going to do it again. How do you create a culture or an organization where this flow, the information from bottom to up, actually works in real world practice?
Very, very important point. And I would just start by saying you need to set the example. You need to visit the marketplace. You need to talk to customers as a leader. There's something that sets in as we get more senior that I call the curse of power.
Mm-hmm.
Curse of power shows up in two important ways. The first is people begin to tell you what they think you'd like to hear, as opposed to the truth. Second, you become more and more detached from reality on the ground. Now, the operational effectiveness of an organization happens at ground level. It doesn't happen in the executive suite. Executive suite is not operational. It's a guidance system.
Pretty much
now, the actual operations happen on the ground. The military know very, very well in its intelligence systems that unless you've got the rapid and accurate flow of information from the ground up, the generals cannot issue commands that will be effective in the moment. And it's no good receiving good intelligence late. Good intelligence received late that's out of date is useless intelligence and can lead organizations wrong. So
Absolutely.
The question is creating this habit of visiting the marketplace, of regularly finding techniques to invite perspectives from the ground up, which means you need to go down levels in the organization and not just sit isolated up there in the kind of stratosphere, of the executive arena. And, all good executives, I've found, are very good at tapping into what's happening at ground level in real time. And that's a crucial thing. I think we should just look at the military as an example, who do this all the time and know that not doing it can be fatal.
Absolutely. Fascinating. There's one last question I have, and that is one of the most crucial questions to me, because it's, again, a double question. You have a chapter on to lead is to teach the power of storytelling, and storytelling is extremely important. And you are a business leader and you went into teaching. One thing I can say for sure, you do not switch from CEO level in American corporate world and go into teaching for financial reasons. I think it's very safe to say you do not join teaching because you think you make more money in that place. So first of all, my first question here, I think you both agree here. So first, what was your decision to say to go from leading into teaching? Because let's face it, you could easily have a massive consultancy career with a top 4, top 5 consultancy company for the next decades to come. And of course, adding to that, to lead is to teach, what is the power of storytelling in your opinion? Just to wrap this up.
Yeah, there's in any kind of strategic decision-making or strategic planning, we need to understand something, that there's the logic and there's the magic. So the final deliverable of a strategy is not just a document. People don't follow documents. They follow leaders and they follow ideas. True. Documents don't motivate. Now, the first thing is you need to have your strategy documented as a frame of reference, but never, ever longer than 10 pages. I offer the thought that anything longer than 10 pages is a general anesthetic. People just don't.
Well said. Well said. People won't read it anyway. Probably today someone would upload it to an AI and get a summary out of it. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and then what we tend to do is to say, well, here's the strategy document. The job is done. Well, the job is starting. That's your platform to communicate. Yeah. And I think it was George Bernard Shaw who made the point that the problem with communication is the illusion that it has occurred. And the problem is we think about communication as being an event. It's not an event, it's a campaign. Taking that strategic clarity, offering it to people in a series of conversations, town hall meetings, and communication sessions involves not just saying, here's the logic of our strategy. You don't ignite passion, commitment that way. You might get compliance, but not commitment.
Yeah.
And for me, success resides in the gap between compliance and commitment. Now, over and over, we find that when people say, this is what we need to do, and as Nietzsche said, people do any what if you give them a good why. And a good why often comes from telling a story, offering a metaphor, drawing a picture, and saying, this sums up. Now, I'll give you a quick example. And that comes from when Bill Clinton was the president of the US. He noticed that when he brought his senior people in to solve a problem, meetings quickly became dysfunctional, backstabbing, turf fights and so on. And he said, stop. We're trying to solve a problem here. Concentrate on solving the problem. It didn't work. So we called up NASA and said, could you give me a moon rock? You brought moon rocks. And they said, yes, we can. And they delivered one. We put it in the middle of the Oval Office. Next time there was a dysfunctional meeting, he said, stop. Do you see that rock? It's 3.5 billion years old, and we're just passing through for one brief moment. Let's make a difference. And you can look that up, Google it. He says it worked every time.
Yeah.
Just that metaphor worked, and there are many, many examples of this. I can give you one other quick one. In a large company, I won't mention their name, largely engineers. I had a seminar with them, and they invited the chairman in. And in the Q&A session, somebody asked the chairman, what does it feel like to be the head of a giant corporation that's global and multifunctional? What do you think about at night? What keeps you awake? And instead of giving a long speech about it, he walked across to a flip chart, and he drew a gearbox. I don't know where the hell this was going. He drew a gearbox. He said, well, being at the head of a large organization is a bit like having your hands on a giant gearbox, with the understanding that if every time I move it just one notch, all the wheels underneath are spinning faster and faster, and those wheels are you. And my job is to turn this giant wheel on just the right issues. And then he went on to say, and by the way, you all also have your hands on a gearbox that meshes with mine, and your job is to turn it on the right issues as well. So everybody's energy and effort is spinning on the right issues. That's about priorities. Then absolutely pause, and he said, you're all engineers. What's the role of the gearbox? And somebody said, well, to transfer power. And he said, exactly.
Yeah.
That has lived in that company even today. That's more than 10 years ago that happened. It's called the parable of the gearbox. There are that. So that's another example. This issue of storytelling, using imagery, using symbols, etc., to illustrate. And the key role of a story is simplification and translating logic into magic.
Excellent. When now people listen to this, and there might be some people who say, I'm just starting my leadership journey, and it looks like it is tremendously complex in today's times. And of course, with all the knowledge, the wisdom, the experience you have, some people might say, if I'm starting out as a leader, could you give me your top 3 tips? What should I look out for in today's time? As the final question of this interview, what are your top 3 tips for emerging leaders who are just starting their journey in the leadership area right now?
Okay. Number 1, leadership is about people. Management is about things. As you make the transition to leadership, recognize both are important, but at the end of the day, work happens through people, and you can never do it alone. So that's the first very important thing to bear in mind. And we need to be psychologists in a kind of a way, in a practical way, understanding what makes other people tick. And they will follow you if they feel you grounded in a sound set of values and that you value them as human beings and their input. So participation becomes key. So tip number 1, it's all about the people. Tip number 2, be very, very clear about priorities. Now, don't get lost in 5, 10, 15 priorities. The evidence shows very, very clearly now, based on our what we call working knowledge in research that was done by Nelson Cowan, that we can only be effective with 3, maximum 4 priorities. Priorities mean that you separate the important from the unimportant and shine a bright light on that, on the critically important things, which is the internal rallying cry. So that's the second tip I would make. And the third one is simplification. I think the critical role in today's very fast-moving environment is the ability to simplify and make increasing simplicity in a world of increasing complexity. So we need to be able to simplify as a learner. And I would just put another thing, underline something else, is be a lifelong learner. Learn to success. Understand that the external environment is constantly changing, and your organization needs to be a learning system led by you and your example.
Perfect. I think these are brilliant final words. Leadership, the Inside Story, time-tested prescriptions for those who seek to lead, by Professor Willie Pietersen. I can tell you I've read many, many books in the leadership area, and I can not strongly enough recommend you to read this book. Professor Willie Pietersen, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure, Niels.